Well, good morning, fellow constitutionalists. Welcome to the Free-for-All-Friday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. And I'm trying to get my video capture up. For some reason this morning, I've been having some technical difficulties with my OBS. And I'm having to switch cameras, and I didn't really want to switch to that one. Let me see if I can get the other one back up, because I don't like that angle. I apologize, folks. For some reason, my main camera just does not want to work, and I've been having focusing issues and everything with that. I'm wondering if I'm going to have some issues with that, so I am going to try to do this camera here. Let me squeeze in just a hair bit here. Try to take out some of the, I didn't want that wide angle view of me on the show, but we'll get going here anyway. So we'll use this one camera here today. And again, I apologize for this. I'm still working with my, on my chat room and everything. I'm still working on trying to get a chat room up here. Oh, I know why that's happening. Deactivate while not showing. That's why it would not go into the main screen. Hang on just a second, folks. I know you guys don't want to see this, but every now and then we just have to bear with me on some of these technical things. There we go. Now I'm back on the screen I want to be on. Oh, let me get this stretched out just a hair bit. Back out to where we need it to. There we go. That's more like it. Well, welcome to the Free-for-All-Friday edition of the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is February 23rd in the year of our Lord, 2018. And remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the wet, soggy, not that the studios are, but the weather outside is, the soggy Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And hopefully, if you're watching on the video part of this, that you'll see a new facial design that I have. And hopefully, I'll take any comments and criticisms of that. My wife really likes it, so guess whose opinion I'm going to take more than anybody else's opinion on this. Now, today's show is about the Second Amendment and gun control. What's happened down in Parkland, Florida, at the school shooting by the school shooter, and the subsequent student outrage, which I think they need to be outraged, but they need to do it in such a way that they're informed. That this week has been just ridiculous. Dana Loesch, from the NRA spokesman, was in a CNN town hall. We're not going to share any of that. I'm just going to put this out to you. And it was almost like a lynch mob there. CNN had no control over the crowd. They had the folks sitting in the center of this crowd, with the crowd all the way around 360 degrees around them, which is idiotic to begin with for security reasons, especially when you have a audience primarily of leftists, and you have someone on the right like Dana, who's the spokesman for the NRA, and actually putting out facts that the left doesn't like. And the sheriff of Broward County totally looked like a moron because he didn't even have his facts straight on that. So Dana was bringing up these things to him, and he didn't even have his facts straight. So again, this whole argument about the Second Amendment and gun control, to me, is getting out of hand. Wednesday night, I got into a Twitter storm, an absolute Twitter storm, and it just, to me, these folks don't get the Second Amendment. So we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. We're going to dissect the Second Amendment. We're going to talk about gun-free zones and gun control. And this is the biggest one-piece legislation put forward in 1990 by none other than former Vice President Biden, Joe Biden, about having gun-free zones. And H.W. Bush, the father of W. Bush, was the one that signed this into law, thinking this was a good idea, that we leave our most precious possessions, our children, in harm's way in these gun-free zones. And we're going to talk about that, okay? We're going to talk about, I'm not going to show you this video, but hopefully everybody goes over and checks out the links that I put up. I don't share everything on the show with you, but I do tell you about them. Over at the danclemenshow.com has my show notes page, and these are already up over there. They are going to be published here shortly right after the show, so you can get these links. I have one YouTube video by Don Blackwell of World Video Bible School, and I first met Don Blackwell. He was a teacher at Freed-Hardeman. He still may be. Freed-Hardeman University down in Tennessee. But he has a video out that's well done, well researched. The Christian in Self-Defense, the truth about the Christian in Self-Defense. Really good video. And I encourage, about 30 minutes long, I encourage you to go over and listen to that and watch that. Leave your comments there. Come back over and leave your comments on my video. You know, I appreciate any and all comments, even the ones that don't paint me in a good light. I do appreciate those. We're going to talk a little bit about John Locke. I do have an article. We're not going to read the whole thing. It's like 8 pages long on a Word document, an open writer. I use Open Office, but on a Word document, about 8 pages long. And it's from Foundation for Economic Education by Jim Powell, written back in '96, talking about John Locke, natural rights of life, liberty, and property. I have a couple slides I want to share with you about John Locke and what he thought about the government, what he thought about rights. I want to get into the Second Amendment, and I'll show you that. And we'll talk about and define some terms. We'll define militia. We'll define what arms mean. We don't have to go into, hopefully we don't have to go into these other terms like the right to bear arms. That means the right to carry them, to bear them along with you as you go. Hopefully we don't have to define those things, but we're really going to dig into the Second Amendment. And I know this isn't going to prove to people once and for all anything about the Second Amendment, because there's a lot of people out there, and I've asked this question and no one's been able to answer this yet. The Bill of Rights, they are put in place to protect rights we already have. Our rights do not derive from government. And this is where liberals, regressive, progressives, those on the left, a lot of folks in the Democrat Party, this is where they go off the rail when it comes to rights and when it comes to freedom and liberty. I've actually had men tell me that our freedom and liberties are granted to us by government. Now that's not a Lockean point of view. That is not the founders of America's point of view. That is not the framers of the Constitution's point of view. They take a Lockean point of view, which the French philosopher Voltaire and Montesquieu actually expound on, especially Montesquieu when it comes to the division of powers in government and a bicameral House and or a bicameral Congress made up of a House and a Senate, and the executive and judiciary, and how these things all work. And the one point I've been trying to get across all week about the Bill of Rights, and I've asked this question and no one's answered me yet, is can you use legislation to take away somebody's natural rights, God-given rights, natural rights, whichever way you want to put it forth? Can you use legislation through the Congress to do away with those rights? Now, I understand if somebody commits a crime or something like that, and they forfeit their rights because they aggressed against somebody. I understand that. Don't get me wrong, I do understand that. However, if I have done nothing wrong legally, can the legislature and the president sign into law something that strips me of my natural rights, something that the people had before the government was ever created? And this is where some of my Christian friends and I sort of part ways on Romans chapter 13, Romans chapter 13 talks about the authority of government. Okay? And we understand, and at least I understand anyway, and I think there's a lot of people out there that do understand this, that in times past, governments were forced upon people. Powerful people got in control of a territory and enforced their will, either through monarchy or tyranny or both, or a republic or democracy was forced on them. The Roman Republic, the old Roman Republic, that was something that wasn't voted on by the people. That was forced on the people. Okay, and we have to make that distinction. We really have to make that distinction, because in America, the founders and the framers, because of their wanting to search these things out, knew very well the different governments. They actually lived under a tyrannical government in the form of England. And they researched. They were students of history. They talked among themselves. They aired their ideas out. No matter how much someone might agree with their ideas, they aired these ideas out. And they let them ferment out there, and they let critical thought take hold, and either dismiss something because of reason and logic, common sense and facts, or supported it because it supported everything I just said about reasons, logics, common sense, and facts. And what a lot of my Christian brethren forget, and what a lot of Democrats in this country and Republicans, a lot of people, I'd say the overwhelming vast majority of Americans don't understand. One, people have always come before governments. There was never a time, and I'm a creationist. I believe that God created the heavens and the earth. So from the time of creation on, there has never been a time where there was a government waiting for the people to fill up the government. People have always come before governments, even God-ordained governments. Okay? People have always come before. They had to. There's no other way it can happen, right? And the founders understood this, the framers understood this, that because the people always come before governments, that makes them sovereign over the governments, over the government that we have in the United States. And some of my Christian friends that push the point in Romans 13 about the government being over everybody, I believe because of the way we have things set up here in the United States, that the people are sovereign over the government, therefore the people can change the government at any time they want. Now, some of my Christian friends thinks no matter how you do it, whether it's through violence or through legislation, going against the government is going against God's will. But here again, if the government is set up with the people being sovereign, whose will are we thwarting if we reestablish, let's say we just use the Constitution as our basis, let's say we reestablish our government based on the Constitution, and we do it legislatively, we do it through states, the amendment process, stuff like that, or through the elections. We actually elect people that are going to stay true to the word and adhere to the Constitution and thwart any legislation that goes against the Constitution. We need governors to stand up in the United States who look at the Constitution as their guide and see all these mandates from on high coming from the federal government that are unconstitutional. We need these governors to stand up and say, the state of so-and-so is not going to follow this because it's not constitutional. And we're protecting our people from an overreaching federal government. We don't see that. And in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with the people sort of hitting a reset button on government, especially in America where the people are sovereign over government. I know this is a strange idea. I know a lot of people out there are going to say, Dan, you're nuts for even thinking that. But the problem is, I'm right. If you look at this logically and reasonably, the federal government wasn't here waiting for the pilgrims to land on Plymouth Rock or other settlers landing down on Jamestown in Virginia and setting up these colonies in the North Carolinas or the Carolinas. The governments weren't waiting for the people to get there. The people came over here, and as the people grew, governments were established. Governments were established. And that's how it has always worked, except in the past, governments were forced on people. In the United States, the people came together to form a more perfect union. The Articles of Confederation were not working. And so they went back to their states and told them, saying, they're just not working. We're not going to get these to work. We need to scrap these and start all over. They got authorization from their states to do so, except 2 states, and Rhode Island was one of them. And I can't remember the second one that didn't want to get rid of the Articles of Confederation because it actually benefited them far more than they benefited any other of the colonies. And so with that in mind, they kept continually going back to their constituents in their states to try to find out exactly what we need to do. Declaration of Independence, we know that New York abstained from the vote because they didn't get direction from their constituents back in the state in New York. So they were the only one that abstained. Everybody else voted for independence from England. And so we know that the states had control over the delegates. You know, a lot of people say, oh, the Constitutional Convention was a runaway convention. And my argument is, how is it a runaway convention when most of the people there understood that they had to wait for word from their states and their constituents? So we're going to talk about the Second Amendment and everything. I just want to put that out there as a basis for what we're talking about. We'll get into some of what John Locke was talking about. But what I want to share with you now on the show here, and if it wasn't so long, it's right at 4 minutes. It's 3 years ago, Wayne LaPierre told the truth about background checks. And this is a Facebook video I want to share with you, and I wish, and I might do this on Free-for-All-Fridays. I'm not going to share it on every video, but I'm going to make another video just for this to promote this on my channel. But I think on Free-for-All-Friday for a while, until things change, I might play this instead of a commercial, instead of a network affiliate, because I think it's this important that we understand this. So let me get this set up, and we'll be right back.
Here's what the media won't tell you. The NRA has fought for 20 years to put the records of those adjudicated mentally incompetent into the National Instant Check System. And until the politicians demand that they are submitted, killers who are legally prohibited from owning firearms will walk into gun stores and pass every background check they take. So if they really wanted to make a difference, the media would lead every newscast with a reminder that the names of millions of violent felons, criminal gangbangers, and adjudicated mentally incompetent and dangerous people are missing from the background check system. But no one gets ratings by telling the truth about how to stop mass killers. So they don't report that 38 states submit less than 80% of their felony convictions to the system, leaving more than 7 million felony convictions in the dark. They don't tell you the truth. Instead, the only thing the average American has heard about background checks is the absolute fallacy that what we need is more. The system is only as good as the records within it, and the records only get submitted if the politicians demand it. What are the Oregon killer, the WDBJ killer, the Charleston church killer, the Santa Barbara killer, the Maryland Mall killer, the LA airport killer, the DC Navy Yard killer, the Aurora movie theater killer, the Tucson killer, the Virginia Tech killer, and both Fort Hood killers have in common? Every single one of them passed a background check. If you cast a net and the fish swim through the holes, you don't need a bigger net, you need tighter holes. But when it comes to a background check system that's missing the names of millions of prohibited people, the politicians don't want to fix it. The best kept secret is that the National Instant Check System wouldn't exist at all if it weren't for the NRA. It's true. Back in the 90s, President Clinton forced passage of a mandatory waiting period on every handgun purchase in America. Not a background check, a wait. But NRA said as soon as the technology was available, their wait had to be replaced by an instant background check done by the dealer at the point of sale. NRA supported it, NRA got the votes, and NRA got it passed. We demanded an honest system that was supposed to make sure good people can purchase firearms as quickly as possible, a system that catches violent felons, the adjudicated mentally incompetent and dangerous, and every other prohibited person right at the point of sale, where they would be prosecuted for a federal felony. but they aren't. What has happened instead is one of the greatest failures in the history of American leadership. In 2010, roughly 80,000 prohibited people committed a felony by trying to buy a gun. Just 44 were prosecuted for it. Does that sound like a good number to anybody? So when you hear politicians who won't fix the broken system talk about expanding it, don't buy it. Demand what works. Put armed security in every school. Fix the broken mental health system. Enforce the federal gun laws against every criminal thug on the street. Prosecute dangerous people when they show up to buy a gun. And for God's sake, put every prohibited person into the system. That's what common sense gun laws look like.
All right, folks. That was Wayne LaPierre, and he was talking about the federal background check system. And the thing about the federal background check system is, and people don't remember this, that back under, and he said it in there, back under 1993, under Clinton, they had to sign in the law. Okay, it started in 1990, and it was 1990, and well, not Clinton. Hey, let me get back in here. The Gun-Free Zone Act in 1990 was, let me get, let me just click on this real quick, folks. I'm sorry to do this to you here, but let's get this over here so I can bring it up. I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but I think we need to on this. And so we have the Gun-Free Zone Act that's coming up, and I just, like I said, I wasn't going to do this right now, but I have to go into it before I get into the rest of my stuff here. It was the part of the Anabolic Steroids Control Act of 1990, Child Protection Restoration and Penalties Enhancement Act, and there's other titles of that. Okay, and introduced in the Senate by Joseph Biden on October 27, 1990, passed the Senate October 27, 1990. So it was introduced and passed on the same day with a voice vote. Passed in the House of Representatives on October 27th. That was very, very quick. And then signed into law by President George H.W. Bush on November 29th. I was thinking of something else. It was the background checks with Bill Clinton. So this was signed into law by H.W. Bush. And this is the gun-free zone law, where we literally, it's drug and gun-free zone, where we literally turned our schools into turkey shoots for the lunatics and the wackos that are out there that want to harm soft targets, because they won't go against hardened targets. You don't see these guys going in trying to commit mass shootings at banks or military bases, other than the guys that are already there, like the Fort Hood shooters. But I'm talking about these kids. You don't see these going up against hardened targets. They're going in against targets that can't defend themselves. And that's a huge issue. That is a huge issue in our country, and it's something that needs to be taken care of. It's absolutely something that we need to take care of. And we're going to get into that as the show develops here. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you are called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So Paul talks us in verse 1, I beseech you to walk worthy of the calling which you were called. And we as Christians, if we're walking according to the way God and Jesus want us to walk, we need to walk worthy of that calling. Now, we don't always do that. We stumble and we fall, we make mistakes, and sometimes we're just flat out rebellious. But we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about how we walk with Jesus and God. Today's quote mail comes from A.J. Gossip. We can do nothing. We can say sometimes, we can only pray that we feel is a terribly precarious second best. Now, let me stop reading here. Miss A.J. Bishop here says that sometimes we feel that praying is just second best. So long as we can fuss and work and rush about, so long as we can lend a hand, we have some hope. But if we have to fall back upon God, then things must be critical indeed. And this is not the way, and I think this is what he's pointing out here, this is not the way that Christians should be acting. We should always take things to God in prayer first and leave it up to God. And if we can lend a helping hand, yes, but it should never be the other way around. We start a work and then we don't take it, and then we take it to God when things really get out of hand. Christians, we need to be the other way around. Today's short Bible lesson, again, this is a really good lesson by Wes McAdams, and I've actually been talking with him in Facebook about this. Now, he disagrees with me on my premise that the American people are sovereign over the government. And he says he just doesn't think that's the case, and I try to gently correct him, saying, you need to study this out more because people have always come before governments. I haven't heard anything back from him on that yet. Maybe he's the type of guy who will study these things out. But he has Romans 13 re-examined, Obey the Government by Wes McAdams. Now you go over to the DanClementShow.com and click on the show notes page for episode 971. You'll be able to go read that lesson. It's a very good lesson, but again, I don't want people to read too much into it, but I want people to read what's there and how the governments are set up. And the other thing, and this is just a little pet peeve of mine, context is king. We can re-examine Romans 13, but Romans 13 does not stand alone in Scripture. There are a lot of other scriptures that we need to look at also that feed into this. Okay, to take a whole chapter out of the book of Romans and make it stand alone without any other scriptural support, or some other scriptures might, I won't say contradict it, but other scriptures have other takes on it. We shouldn't do that either. And that's why I suggest you go watch the video by Don Blackwell, The Christian and Self-Defense. I think Don does a much better job than Wes does on explaining a lot of these things. All right. Now, before we get into the definition of the Second Amendment, I want to go through, and this is why I was talking about some of these like gun-free zones. This is why I wanted to talk about these to begin with on these gun-free zones. And let me get everything set up and get over there. What percentage of mass shootings happen in gun-free zones? The numbers are stunning. And they are stunning. They are absolutely mind-boggling. And I also have, and I'll show you just some of the charts on it, but I also have another article talking about showing how mass public shootings keep occurring in gun-free zones. And this is sort of a backup article to the what percentage that we have here. But this is by Amanda Preston Giacomo over at the Daily Wire, published on the 22nd of this month. After dozens of warning signs and alerts from concerned citizens went unnoticed, a shooter walked into the South Florida high school and murdered 17 people. In the wake of the tragic mass shooting, guns and gun-free zones have become a hot-button issue. Now, let me stop the reading here just for a second. There's been more stuff coming out every day. There was a deputy assigned to the school. There was a deputy assigned to the school that was supposed to help protect the school, and he didn't. He did not go in and try to stop the shooter. And I'm like, I know people get scared. I know he doesn't want to lose his life, but he should have never put on the badge if he wasn't willing to lay his life on the line. He should never have put on that badge. And so that's another piece of information that's coming out. And the Broward County Sheriff should have known that. Matter of fact, he did after the fact, and it took how many days now for that to come out? I think that fact came out yesterday. But anyway, the left has since turned up the volume on calls for a crackdown on Second Amendment rights, quickly exploiting teens who attend and the targeted school to make the case for them. They have also slammed the suggestion that schools should have armed security and perhaps well-trained voluntary armed teachers. But what does the evidence say about gun-free zones? And this is part of the conversation that we need to have, that the left is unwilling to have. They're trotting these kids out. And I'm glad these kids want to be part of the conversation. I really am. I don't think we should be stopping or mocking any of these kids from being part of the conversation. But we cannot have a conversation on pure emotion. There has to be facts. And they keep saying, especially on CNN, they keep talking about how this was a fully automatic weapon, that the AR is an assault rifle, but they can never tell you exactly what an assault rifle is, other than, well, it's a military style rifle. And I've actually had people come back on Twitter, and I said, well, what's the AR and the 15 stand for the rifle? And they come back, assault rifle. And I don't know how many people said that, and I'm like, no, it doesn't mean assault rifle. That's what people thinks it means. It's an abbreviation for Armalite, one of the original makers of the AR-15. AR, Armalite. And that's what it is. It's an abbreviation for that. And as a matter of fact, most of these guns, these AR-15s and stuff like that, if you take all the pistol grips and everything off of them and put a wooden stock, which you can, they look like any other hunting rifle. People don't have a problem with it, but mechanically they're the same thing. So again, people are running on emotion. I understand that. I've never been involved in a shooting or anything like that, but I understand how emotions can run high, and those emotions take over our brains. But we need to slow the conversation down a little bit. And this town hall that CNN had last night with the sheriff of Broward County, I'm going to have a separate video on that, and Dana Loesch, was ridiculous. And I couldn't believe how many young kids were there that were speaking up and making speeches and accusing Dana and the NRA of having blood on their hands. In this Twitter storm on Wednesday, I couldn't believe how many people didn't understand the Second Amendment. They don't know how to define their terms. They don't know what rights are. Just all the way down the line. You know, they're ignorant. They're ignorant of these facts. And I have a video out, and I'll link to the video because maybe you hadn't seen it yet. It was last week, or no, beginning of this week. Excuse me. Emma Gonzalez. She has been all over the news, and I saw this news feed, and I went through it and looked and seen how many things she got factually wrong. I didn't initially intend to do that. I just wanted to see what she was saying. And then I kept hearing these things. So, well, that's not right, and that's not right. So I went through and critiqued the video, and it's one of my best videos to date as far as viewerships and comments and stuff. But the comments I was getting in there, again, people don't know. They haven't studied it out. I had a young man, he said, you know, we were going back and forth in some comments, and finally he says, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you all day. I'm not a boy. I'm a grown man. And I'm like, okay, what's that got to do with the price of tea in China? You know, and he was sticking to his guns no matter how, ill-informed he was. And that's a problem. And let me finish this link to. Okay. So, again, all these conversations it's not the gun. That's just a symptom of a bigger problem. And one of the parts of that bigger problem is these gun-free zones. The other one is what LaPierre said in that video about 80%, there's like 23 states that they don't report 80% of the felons that they're supposed to the National Instant Background Check System. And so these criminals can go in and buy a gun. The Sutherland Springs criminal shooter, the military didn't send that domestic violence out to the National Background Check, and they're supposed to. And the Air Force is checking in on that to see what happened with that. So there's a lot of holes in the net, as Wayne LaPierre would say. Instead of getting a bigger net, which is what the gun control folks want to do, why don't we fix some of the holes in the net first and see if that takes care of it? And one of them here is the gun-free zone. Now, let me go down the article here. It says, But what does the evidence say about gun-free zones? According to the Crime Prevention Research Center, gun-free zones, areas where guns are prohibited, have been the target of more than 98% of all mass shootings. This staggering number is why such designated areas are often referred to as soft targets, meaning unprotected and vulnerable. According to the Crime Prevention Research Center, only a little more than 1% of mass public shootings since 1950 have occurred in places that were not considered to be gun-free zones. The Blaze reports, in fact, as the Crime Prevention Research Center President John Lott Jr. noted in October 2015, only 2 mass shootings in the U.S. since 1950 have occurred in an area where citizens were not prohibited from carrying a gun. And then it goes into talking about Vice President Joe Biden and how he did what he did and introducing that bill. And it's, to me, it's kind of strange that we introduce a bill like this and then we wonder why our kids are being slaughtered or adults are being slaughtered in malls and stuff like that because of these gun-free zones. And I just want to bring this other slide up to you. And this has been updated since this was put out. And this was put out in, let me see here, in September of 2014. And the last update I've seen on this report was June 5th of 2017. More misleading information from Bloomberg's Every Town for Gun Safety on Guns, analysis of recent mass shootings showing how mass public shootings keep occurring in gun-free zones. Now, Every Town for Gun Safety is a Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire that used to be the mayor of New York City, has backed. And I went over 4 or 5 stories coming out from Every Town for Gun Safety off their website, and every one of them were factually incorrect. Factually incorrect. So anytime I hear any statistic from Every Town for Gun Safety, I'm dismissing it. They're no good. And here's another one. And these, I'm just going to show you some of the charts. Mass public shootings in gun-free zones, 1950 through July 10th, 2016. 98.4% occurred in gun-free zones. 1.6% occurred where guns are allowed. Percentage of shootings in gun-free zones between January 1998 and December 2015. Only 3.8% of the shootings were in mass public shootings where guns were allowed, and then the other one was 96.2% of mass shootings in gun-free zones. So it's part of the problem we need to really talk about is some of the laws we enacted to put our children in harm's way. And one of them is these gun-free, drug-free zones around schools. Now, the drugs, I understand that. Let's keep the drugs out of schools. And if you commit a drug crime on school grounds or in the proximity of school grounds, you need to be punished even more because you're up to no good. You're up to no good. You're trying to hook these children early on drugs so you can make money off of somebody else's misery like that. And it's just, especially with an illegal drug or an illicit drug. Even if drugs were legal, I would still say that we need to keep the drugs away from the schools, to be quite frankly, because we need that. We absolutely need that. So we have this evidence that gun-free zones do not prevent mass shootings. And I think the Parkland, Florida school shooting brings that to light. Now, I haven't heard all the testimonies by these kids, but I haven't heard these kids talking about why do we have these schools as gun-free zones. All I hear them doing, and this is a shame, is they're pushing a regressive leftist agenda when it comes to guns. That, the gun-free zones, we need those. We need to keep the guns out of there. But we have evidence that over 96% of the mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. And so, even in the shorter amount of time on this study, it actually goes up. on the percentages. And so we again, they're tackling the wrong problems. Wayne LaPierre in that video talked about how they've been fighting for 20 years to get these mental health folks on the national background check database to prevent them from getting weapons. And liberals and leftists and regressives out there have been fighting that for 20 years. Oh, it's an invasion of privacy. Well, you know what? I'm the type of person that I believe that some rights supersede others' rights. What am I saying here? Parkland, Florida, 17 kids were killed. More that were maimed and, put in critical condition. A coach lost his life protecting the children. And 39 times, whether the sheriff of Broward County wants to admit it or not, I thought that was the funniest part of the whole town hall last night when he says, well, you seem to know more about these than I do. And you would think that a county sheriff would want to know, if the media is saying that he was contacted by law enforcement 39 times, you think that he would actually check into that. But no, he was pushing the question back to Dana, well, you prove it. And she's saying the media, and CNN was the first one to talk about this. Are you saying they're factually wrong? And he pretty much said, yes, they were. But it's coming out. I was watching the Blaze this morning. It's coming out more and more. And again, I'm going to make another video over the weekend about this with some of these updated facts about the deputy and some of the instances where the shooter was interacting with government agencies, including the sheriff's department. So the sheriff doesn't want this to blow back on him, and it's definitely going to. It's got to blow back on him. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And so we have this just building amount of information that if he would have been put on a 72-hour mental hold and evaluated properly, and he was, according to the Blaze, he was evaluated, and they said, and it was just a one-time meeting, and they said there's nothing here. He's not a harm to anybody. And again, that blew up in somebody's face, didn't it? So there's so many times that this could have been stopped. And it almost seems like, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, that's what I was accused of on some of these Twitter storms I was involved in, that I'm just a conspiracy theorist, because I believe just like Alex Jones. And I've said, I don't know how many times over the years over on this program, that I rarely, if ever, listen to Alex Jones. I don't like listening to Alex Jones because everything with him is a conspiracy. And not everything that goes on out there is a conspiracy. And so I don't buy into that. I don't buy into all these conspiracies because, one, conspiracies are usually committed by more than one person. And two, people can't keep their trap shut. They got to brag about things. So if all these conspiracies are happening, it would stand to reason that we would have some leaks somewhere. So again, it's gun-free zones, it's mental health. There's too many holes in the National Instant Background Check for it to work properly, and these holes need to be fixed. We don't need more gun laws. We need the ones we have on the books actually enforced. And as Dana pointed out in that town hall last night, there were several Florida state statutes that the young man violated and broke, and yet throughout the whole process of the 39, whether it was all 39 were done by the deputies or a mixture of the deputies, the sheriff's office, and children and youth, or mental services or whatever, there were 39 times they could have stopped this young man. They didn't. So at least, in my opinion, the FBI, the Broward County sheriffs, and all the government agencies that had ever visited or talked with this young man, they're at least culpable in this because they did not stop this mass shooting. Now, let's get into John Locke's, what he expressed as far as the government, his actual view on government. He expressed the radical view that government is morally obliged to serve people, namely by protecting life, liberty, and property. He explained the principle of checks and balances to limit government power. He favored representative government and a rule of law. He denounced tyranny. He insisted that when government violates individual rights, people may legitimately rebel. So that was John Locke's view on government. It's a basic view. It doesn't go into every single nook and cranny, and it's just boiled down. And if you want to take me to task for that, fine. I don't have hours and hours on this show to go over this. I am starting a new project that's going to take a few months to get off the ground, and I'm not going to get too far into this, but we're going to cover issues like this in this new project that I'm starting. As we get in and talk about, we talked about gun control quite a bit here. As we get into talk about rights, which we have to talk about, and what John Locke thought about rights, let's first look and see what the Bill of Rights are. And what is a Bill of Rights? And a Bill of Rights, a formal statement of the fundamental rights of the people of the United States, incorporated in the Constitution as Amendments 1 through 10 and in all state constitutions. So this is a formal statement talking about the fundamental rights of the people of the United States. And I submit to you that these natural rights, and he calls these natural rights throughout his writings, and I submit to you these natural rights the people had and still have before government was ever instituted. And my question still stands. I'm actually going to be emailing Chris Ann Hall because she might be able to help me out with this, because she is a lawyer, or was a lawyer, and she teaches the Constitution. And I've been researching this myself. But can a legislature legislate away a person's natural rights? Now, these are to protect our rights. Now, people, I think they've correctly stated that, yeah, we can propose an amendment and try to get it ratified by the states that take away the Second Amendment. And that's taking away the protections of the Second Amendment. But does that take away our fundamental right as human beings to protect ourselves? That's a question that needs to be asked and answered. I'm asking it, and I need an answer to it. Now, John Locke goes on and talks about what are rights. He talks about what are rights. He said the first part of the theory of natural rights consists of basic rights, which are derived from the law of nature and encompasses such things as life, liberty, and property. The theory mandates that the highest priority be given to individual self-preservation, and whatever is necessary to achieve the preservation of the individual, people may legitimately rebel. Now, John Locke was talking about and dealing with individuals. And he said the theory mandates that the highest priority be given to individual self-preservation. This is going contrary to the popular premise that is put forth by regressive progressives in this country. And we're talking about identity politics, and we're talking about tribalism. And I've been listening to Jordan Peterson for quite a while now, and Glenn Beck had him on his radio show this morning, which I actually watch on TV. And Jordan Peterson said the worst thing that can happen to, and he's reasoned this out very well, the worst thing that can happen to a society is the breakout of tribalism and identity politics, because we're always fighting. We're always fighting everybody. And what made Western civilization great was individualism, was the self-preservation of the individual. And therefore, if we preserve the individual will help preserve society. But it can't be the other way around. It can't be we set up community is superior to the individual and whatever the community wants, and that could be the destruction of the individual, then that's the way we have to go. And that's what happens to multiculturalism, identity politics, tribalism. We see it in our politics now. Everybody puts party over principle, as Chris Ann Hall would say. They put the Republican Party over any type of principles. And that's one of the reasons why I left the Republican Party, and I'm a constitutional conservative. And I've always been preaching this message for a long, long time about the highest priority given to individual self-preservation. And whatever's necessary to achieve the preservation of the individual, people may legitimately rebel. And this is exactly what happened in the founding of this country. We rebelled against tribalism. We rebelled against tyranny. That the state and the society and the community was more important than the individual. And this is why I go back to my premise about individuals are sovereign in the United States, are sovereign over their government, because we came first and that's how things were set up. Matter of fact, the people set up the states, and states came together and set up the federal government. And people don't understand that simple premise. And it just amazes me how ignorant people are. And they're willfully. It's not willful, it's willful ignorance, because these things can be researched and found out. Yeah, you can have your opinions, you can be in your narrative-driven echo chambers and listen to something and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and stop researching right there. But you need to always go and see what the other side is saying about the subject. I'm a conservative. I'm generally concerned about what liberals are saying, what progressives are saying. And I stack them up against fact, reason, common sense, history, and see how well they stand up. And if they don't stand up, after that analysis, then I can reject them properly. Now, since we're talking about the Second Amendment, let's get into the Second Amendment. And this was this more than anything in the Twitter storm on Wednesday night that I got into was the driving factor here. Now, I want you to notice where the commas are. And I was actually going to do this video yesterday. It just got too big for a single day show and all the research I was doing on this. I had folks in modern times of grammarians say that the commas were an accident. They were put in there by the founding fathers on accident. They didn't really mean to put them in there, because modern grammatical thinking is you don't put the commas in like that. But that flies in the face of everything else that the founding fathers, especially the framers, I'm going to deal with the framers right now, which some of them were the founding fathers, or in that era, they argued over punctuation. There's many in a lot of the notes that were kept, like Madison kept. They talked in there about, should we put a punctuation here or there? The Second Amendment was revised 4 or 5 times at least, and this is where it boiled down to. So there's four distinct parts or phrases in the Second Amendment, and they have to be taken as that. You got 4 distinct parts and 2 sections. A well-regulated militia. That's comma. That's the first phrase. Well, what in the world is a well-regulated militia? In order to define that, we need to define what a militia is. And I went back to Webster's 1828 dictionary. You can actually go online and just look it up, Webster's 1828 dictionary. And it's an online dictionary. And it defines things as the founders and the framers of the Constitution would have defined things in that era. And a militia, now it's a noun. It's Latin for miles, a soldier. War, to fight, combat, contention. The primary sense of fighting is to strive, struggle, drive, or to strike, to beat. And then it goes on to some Latin, and to labor or toil. But this is the meat of the definition. The body of soldiers in a state enrolled for discipline, but not engaged in actual service except in emergencies, as distinguished from regular troops whose sole occupation is war or military service. The militia of a country are the able-bodied men organized into companies, regiments, and brigades with officers of all grades and required by law to attend military exercises on certain days only, but at other times left to pursue their usual occupations. Now, based on this definition, there's a lot of people out there who say, well, that's what the National Guard does. And I'm here to tell you that is not the militia. The National Guard is not the militia. The National Guard is a state extension, especially the Army. I'm going to pick on the Army National Guard, of the Army. It's a state extension of the Army. And it's totally different from the militia. And nowhere, I went through several states, Pennsylvania being one of them, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, nowhere has the states opted out of this type of militia that the founding fathers are talking about. And the type of militia that was actually used in the Revolutionary War. These were farmers and stuff like that. And were they as well trained as the rest of the military? No. But their job was unlike a standing army. This was more of a defensive force to protect. And this is the second phrase of that first section of the Second Amendment. Being necessary to the securing of a free state. So you got to take the first two phrases together. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Now this militia, again, let me go back over to the definition. I can't emphasize this enough. The militia of a country are the able-bodied men organized into companies, regiments, and brigades with officers of all grades and required by law to attend military exercises on certain days only, but at other times left to pursue their usual occupations. And I believe the reason why, and I'm still trying to do some more research on this, I believe the reason why that the states do not call the militia up is because they erroneously believe that the National Guard is taking that role of the militia. But the problem with that definition is the militia was never used as a standing army. It was there for the protection, the security of a free state. And I was reading some definitions about this, and I thought one of the best definitions on free state, it's not the individual states. It's the securing of, and this is the idea of keeping these states free. Because what happens if you have a standing army and you sent that standing army out of the country to go fight a war, as a lot of European countries did? Okay, France sent troops, before the founding of America, they were constantly sending troops over to England, and England was sending troops over to France to fight wars and stuff like that. Who's going to protect the homeland? And that's what they were thinking about with this militia thing. If we have a standing army, the tendency is to send them off to war. Well, while they're fighting war, if the enemy is on like a diversion, getting the main troops out of the way, then there would be nobody there to protect the freedom of the states. So in the Second Amendment, this was very important to the founding fathers, that we have this well-regulated militia. And for whatever reason, the states aren't calling these anymore. And honestly, I think the governors and the legislatures really need to rethink this, because there's a lot of men and women who would be willing to be part of the militia to keep the state free. Hopefully I made a lot of sense to you, I hope. Now, the second part of this is after a well-regulated militia, and this is where this one young lady from Britain was getting stuck on. Well, it says well-regulated. And I said, well, you need to go through and read that the way it was with the punctuations. And she didn't want to hear that. All she was stuck on was a well-regulated militia. And so therefore we can regulate your right to keep and bear arms. But the problem with that, and this is necessary to take, context is king. And we need to keep this whole thing in context. We're talking about the Bill of Rights. We're talking about people's individual rights here. Okay, just like the Constitution is a document that limits the powers of the federal government, therefore anything written in the Constitution are limiting in nature also. Likewise, in the Bill of Rights are protecting individual rights that we all have before government, before the federal government was ever established, before the states were ever established. We had these natural rights, as John Locke would say. The right, this is after a comma, folks, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. This was a natural right that John Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and some other philosophers of the time felt that this was a natural right that people had, that we had the right to keep and bear arms for self-protection and also protecting against aggressors, whether it be a foreign country or our own government. And if you go back and read some of the founding fathers and their thoughts on this, you'll see that the biggest part of this was to combat a tyrannical government. Now, I urge you to go back to the Declaration of Independence and read the paragraphs before it gets into what the king and England were actually doing, why we were declaring our independence, and they spelled that out. It talks about how if a government becomes or goes against people's natural rights and start taking away their natural rights, as John Locke would say, again, as he would say, whatever is necessary to achieve the preservation of the individual, people may legitimately rebel, which means we can reset the government in such a way as to protect our individual rights. So the Bill of Rights, I'm going to put it to you this way. I may be wrong, and you may be able to argue me out of this, but right now, with the research and understanding and reasoning and common sense I'm trying to use here, is the Bill of Rights, I don't think can be amended. Now, I know they call them amendments, but they also call the first 10 amendments our Bill of Rights. And actually, I think they need to go back and revamp that and add in like the suffrage amendment for giving the women the vote. Okay, I think that needs to be moved up into our Bill of Rights. And I think maybe the Civil War amendments may need to be moved up into the Bill of Rights. And I think the Bill of Rights has a protection from amendments. It's my only personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. Again, how can you, these are protecting our natural rights that we had before government. How can you, or any state or any group, democracy, vote away our natural rights? And by stripping away the Second Amendment, you are in essence taking away our natural rights that we had before government. Now, hopefully that argument isn't very circular, and hopefully that's, in my opinion, I think it's a pretty good argument. But the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Why? And a lot of people call this the militia amendment. The Second Amendment's the militia amendment. Okay, I can roll with that because I'm gonna fold this over into this real quickly here. If the state can call up the militia at any time, what good is it if, and back then it was just men from like 16 to 60, what good would it have been if a man was away from home and not allowed to bear arms, not allowed to carry his arms with him, and the state called up the militia at a moment's notice, and the man didn't have time to go back to his house to pick up his arms? And if that was the case with too many of them, what good's the militia to begin with? You see what I'm saying? So the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And they even go as far as some of the framers and the founding fathers even go as far as this is also to protect the civilians, protect themselves on the frontier, because like in modern times, help isn't always immediate. Average police response time is 20 minutes. Even more if you're out in the middle of nowhere. Like in some of our western states, you're really far away from the police. So again, I think this all makes sense. Now, let me get over this last slide before we end the show here. And this is a definition of arms. Now, arms, it's a noun and it's plural. And in Latin, it's arma. I guess that's how you pronounce it. It's weapons for offense or armor for defense and protection of the body, war and hostility. To be in arms, to be in a state of hostility or in a military life. To arms is a phrase which denotes a taking arms for war or hostility, particularly a summoning to war. To take arms is to arm for attack or defense. Bred to arms denotes that a person has been educated to the profession of a soldier. Okay? But all these have, most weapons are offensive weapons. And it can be, just like in football, good defense is the best defense is a good offense. Make sure your offense is doing well. But even in offense, you need some defense in there to protect the quarterback or, the running back, whatever, for the body. So keep and bear arms. And this doesn't only, and this is what frustrates me about folks, and you try to explain this to them, this is not a gun amendment. This is not a gun amendment, folks. It just isn't. This can pertain to bows and arrows. Okay. It can pertain to tomahawks, spears, swords, shields. Again, we are woefully informed about what arms actually means. It doesn't only mean a gun. I was reading a story. I was going to share it on the show, but didn't have a chance to put it in, and I might link to it. I'm still debating. I might do a separate video on that one too. Back in 2014, I think it was April 2014, a young man in a school north of Pittsburgh with a knife. Now, I didn't read through the article. I remember it in the news, and I'm going to refresh my memory, but something like 32 people he's seriously injured with just knives, 2 knives that he had. And again, in a gun-free zone. And I can't help but think, I don't mean to make light of this at all, folks. I really don't. But humor gets me through some of these. If I didn't have humor, and I think some people would agree with me, if I didn't have some humor in these situations, we'd go stark raving mad. I can't help to think if there was a teacher, especially a male teacher, that confronted that young man with knives, that he would go back to the Sean Connery line in Untouchables, where he was the Irish street cop, and he says it's just like a so-and-so to bring a knife to a gunfight. I just go back to that. That just folds right into my brain when I think about that. And I'm dead serious about this. I really am. That we misunderstand so many things in life. Second Amendment to me is very, very easy to understand. It really is. And as long as you don't tear it apart and try to use modern grammar and try to use modern vernaculars, definitions in other words, to explain what the Second Amendment means. If we understand correctly what the Second Amendment means, and once we start going through the arguments of mental health, of getting states to report these felonies that would disqualify people from owning a weapon. Actually, in that video, Wayne LaPierre said there's something like 80,000 attempts in the United States of people who are not legally allowed by law to own a weapon, to try to go through a background check to buy a weapon. And that's that. And knowing that you cannot pass a background check as a felony, only 44 people were prosecuted out of 80,000 that were, and they get these from the gun shops. They get these from the gun shops. And sometimes people don't know. Now, I've read stories about some people, they were disqualified and they didn't really know why. And they never spent time in jail, never arrested or convicted of a felony or stuff like that. And maybe they got a protective order against them. They didn't know it, and it was on record. I'm not saying that's the reason, but there's very few people going to background check don't know if they'll. I knew when I purchased my mechanic TPS 9 or TPS 90. I knew that I'd pass a background check. There's nothing in my past that would prevent me from owning a pistol. And the paperwork, they put it through the system, and a couple minutes later, it came back, nope, you're good to go. And I pretty much, I had to go to the cash register to get the firearm, but I went up to cash register and paid the money. I paid them back there for the background check, and I went up there and paid her the money up there because we were buying some other stuff. And I walked out the door with a pistol that same day after I shot a rental in their indoor gun range to see if I liked it or not. I did. I loved it. And this gun, this first pistol I've ever owned. I've shot plenty, but this first pistol I ever owned, I like it. I like the action of it and everything, but I don't want to get too bogged down on that. But people know if they're going to pass a background check or not. They absolutely know. And if they don't, then they're trying to fool somebody. They're trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes, especially these guys that are convicted of felonies that would prevent them from owning a gun. And this is the other part. It's not only that these people commit that would actually disqualify them from owning a firearm. It's also these mental health issues that, and I know it's a tightrope we're walking, but doggone it, we're talking about, especially in these school shootings, we're talking about kids' lives. And I think the preservation of life overrules somebody's need for privacy, especially when it comes to mental health. We don't need to know what their mental health issue is. We don't need to actually know their names as far as the public. But in a federal background check, I think that information needs to be put in, or at least the name, and that's a, put a code on it and say, it disqualifies them from owning it. That way the firearm shop can help with this. Because I know some guys that own firearm shops, and the last thing they ever want to hear is one of their weapons that they sold somebody was used in the commission of a crime. That's the last thing they want to hear. And the first thing I can make sure that they crossed all their I's and dotted all their T's. I know I said that backwards. It's amazing to me, folks, how little I think people actually view life. How little they put a value on our children's life. We lock up everything else, from banks to military bases to law, to federal buildings and state buildings and stuff like that. But yet we leave our most vulnerable to the whims of madmen and people with mental health issues, because it takes a certain type of mentality, a bad one, to want to go into a school and shoot up innocent kids. That's a special kind of wacko as far as I'm concerned, and this needs to be dealt with. Honestly, I think Congress needs to pass a bill on this, and I think it needs to be passed today, about allowing these mental health issues to be put on the National Instant Background Check Register, so these guns don't get into the hands of these folks. I think the Baker Act in Florida needs to be expanded, mightily expanded. And let me get this off of here. I didn't have that switched over there. The Baker Act in Florida is an act that where they can hold somebody for like a 72-hour mental hold. And I think as suspicion that's going to happen. And so we have folks that are, I'm still streaming here. Okay. We have folks here that are not doing their jobs down in Broward County, as far as I'm concerned, and left this slip through the cracks. And these issues of gun-free zones, mental health, tightening up the background checks, I think these are where we need to start. We don't need to start disarming people that never broke the law, like me. I never broke the law with a weapon and haven't committed a felony in order to be disqualified from owning one. I appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, leave your comments. Please share this video with everybody. I think the information I'm giving out here is very important. And if you don't agree with what I have to say, please get into discussion with me. I would love that. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we'll see you on the next video.